In the quiet Northern Virginia suburbs, a routine morning devolved into a constitutional crisis within moments. Officer Clint Higgins believed he had apprehended a suspect, but in reality, he had inadvertently triggered the end of his career. He perceived a black woman dressed in a bathrobe and made an assumption about her presence. He demanded identification, insisted on compliance, and expected respect. Yet, he failed to inquire about her identity. Had he done so, he would have discovered that the woman on her own driveway was not merely a resident, but Federal Circuit Judge Serafina Wallace. The judicial robe she wears at work carries far more authority than the one she donned that morning. Observe closely, for the retribution this officer faces is not only satisfying, but also establishes a crucial legal precedent. The morning of October 14th dawned with a deceptive tranquility in the upscale Stone Creek neighborhood, an area where lawns were meticulously maintained, and the only common noise disturbance was a leaf blower operating too early on a Sunday. Judge Serafina Wallace stood on her porch, breathing in the crisp autumn air. She adjusted the sash of her burgundy silk robe, a gift from her husband on their 25th wedding anniversary. At 52 years of age, Serafina exuded an aura of authority that remained intact regardless of her attire. She had dedicated the past 2 decades to ascending from a public defender's office to the federal bench, a path marked by sleepless nights and the constant pressure of being the sole black woman in professional settings. This particular day was planned as a relaxed start, with her court schedule not commencing until 10 o'clock in the morning. Clutching a mug of steaming Earl Grey tea, she descended the brick pathway toward her mailbox. The sun was just beginning to rise above the oak trees, casting elongated, peaceful shadows across the driveway. A patrol car slowly rounded the corner. Serafina did not immediately look up. She collected a small stack of mail, mostly unsolicited advertisements, and a few legal journals, then turned back towards her residence. The patrol car did not proceed. Its tires crunched softly on the gravel shoulder before coming to a complete stop directly in front of her driveway. Officer Clint Higgins occupied the driver's seat. He was 27 years old, had served on the force for 3 years, and carried himself with the unearned confidence of someone who had rarely faced opposition without the backing of his badge. He was patrolling Stone Creek following a report of suspicious activity, alerted by a neighbor residing 2 streets away concerning an individual observed peering into car windows. Higgins observed Serafina. In his mind, the circumstances did not align. It was 7:15 in the morning on a Tuesday. The established homeowners in this community were typically already en route to work in Washington, D.C., or occupied in their offices. The woman in the driveway was wearing a robe. She was black and moved with a sense of purpose that Higgins misinterpreted as evasion. He shifted the patrol car into park and exited the vehicle. He did not immediately adjust his body camera, but rested his hand near his holstered weapon, a habit cultivated from observing senior officers at the precinct. __0_Higgins called out, his tone less a greeting and more a demand for attention. Serafina paused midway up her walkway and turned slowly, her expression unreadable. She had encountered hostile witnesses, dishonest defendants, and presumptuous prosecutors. A patrol officer in a standard uniform was hardly an event that would elevate her heart rate. __1__, she responded calmly and with measured composure, then turned again towards her front door. __2__, Higgins stated, stepping onto the lawn. He cut across the grass, disregarding the paved walkway. __3__ Serafina stopped. She turned fully to face him this time, her mug of tea held steady. __4________ __5_____ Higgins reiterated, his tone hardening. He disliked her lack of immediate compliance and the analytical detachment in her gaze rather than fear. ___________6____________________________________________________________________________________________________________ Serafina acknowledged. ___8_______. She turned once more. This was the precise moment the dynamic shifted. Higgins was unaccustomed to dismissal. He was accustomed to nervousness. He was accustomed to individuals scrambling to prove their innocence. Quote, underscore 9, underscore, Higgins barked, closing the distance. He was now 10 feet away from her, standing firmly on her private property. Quote, underscore 10, underscore, Serafina took a sip of her tea, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked over the rim of the mug. Quote, underscore 11, underscore, quote, underscore 12, underscore, Higgins replied, puffing out his chest. Quote, underscore 13, quote, underscore 14, Serafina inquired calmly. Quote, underscore 15, Higgins's face flushed a blotchy red. Don't get smart with me. The suspect was a black female, medium build. You fit that description. Now, show me ID or we're going to have a problem, Serafina sighed. A sound of profound weariness. The sound of someone who had witnessed such scenarios unfold countless times, in case files but rarely on her own front lawn. Officer, she said, her voice dropping an octave, adopting the tone that had silenced courtrooms. I am not obligated to provide identification to you on my own property without reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been committed, is being committed, or is about to be committed. Fitting a description as vague as the one you've just fabricated does not meet the threshold established in Terry v. Ohio. Now, please remove yourself from my lawn. Higgins froze. He heard the legal terminology, but failed to grasp the warning, perceiving only a challenge. Ego is a dangerous intoxicant, and Officer Clint Higgins was in the throes of an overdose. Instead of de-escalating, instead of reading the situation, or, in this instance, the driveway, Higgins chose to double down. He unclipped the retention strap on his radio and stepped closer, invading Serafina's personal space. Quote, underscore 19, underscore, Higgins growled, pointing a finger directly at her face. Quote, underscore 20. Serafina remained unperturbed. She carefully placed her mug on the stone retaining wall of her flower bed and set the mail beside it. She wanted her hands free, not for combat, but for emphasis. Quote, underscore 21, underscore, she began, glancing at his name tag. Quote, underscore 22, quote, underscore 23, Higgins snapped, his hand instinctively moving towards his handcuffs. Quote, underscore 24, Serafina replied. Quote, underscore 25, Higgins commanded, gesturing behind her back. Quote, underscore 26, Serafina asked, holding her ground. She stood tall, her silk robe rippling slightly in the breeze. Quote, underscore 27, quote, underscore 28, Higgins listed, grabbing her arm. The physical contact marked the point of no return. Serafina stiffened, but did not pull away, knowing it would only provoke further escalation. She looked directly into his body camera, which was now illuminated with a blinking red light. Quote, underscore 29, Serafina, stated clearly for the record. Quote, underscore 30, Higgins spun her around, roughly pulling her arms behind her back. The silk of her robe bunched as he fastened cold metal handcuffs onto her wrists, tightening them aggressively and pinching her skin. Quote, underscore 31, Higgins muttered, propelling her towards the patrol car. Quote, underscore 32, quote, underscore 33, Serafina replied, her cheek pressed against the cool glass of the police cruiser as he conducted a pat-down, a humiliating and invasive frisk witnessed by her neighbors who were now observing from their windows. Quote, underscore 34, Higgins emitted a dry, humorless chuckle. Quote, underscore 35, he shoved her into the back of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat felt cold. Serafina sat awkwardly, her hands cuffed behind her, her robe askew. She closed her eyes momentarily, centering herself. Anger simmered beneath the surface, intense and sharp, but she suppressed it, recognizing that precision, not emotion, was required. Higgins entered the front seat and radioed dispatch. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 36, underscore, 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 quote, underscore, 37, underscore, underscore. The dispatcher crackled back as they departed the meticulously kept streets of Stone Creek. Higgins glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 38, underscore, underscore, Serafina opened her eyes, their expression dark, cold, and utterly formidable. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 39, underscore, underscore, she repeated softly. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 40, underscore, underscore. Higgins amplified the radio, drowning out her voice. He felt accomplished, having apprehended a suspect, asserted dominance, and performed police work. He arrived at the precinct 20 minutes later and escorted Serafina through the rear entrance, past the holding cells, and to the booking desk. Sergeant Miller, a seasoned officer, looked up from his computer. He observed Higgins escorting a woman in a silk bathrobe and slippers. Miller frowned, squinted, and examined the woman's face, then Higgins, and then back at the woman. His eyes widened. "Higgins," Miller stated, his voice low and urgent. "What do you have there?" "Refusal to identify, disorderly conduct, resisting," Higgins replied proudly, placing the paperwork on the counter. "Found her lurking in a driveway in Stone Creek, wouldn't show ID." Serafina stood erect despite the handcuffs, meeting Sergeant Miller's gaze directly. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 45, underscore, underscore, she said, her voice calm and conversational. Sergeant Miller's face turned pale. He rose so abruptly his chair rolled back and struck the wall. Judge Wallace," Miller stammered. Higgins froze, the pen in his hand suspended above the arrest report. The room fell silent, the usual precinct clamor seemingly absorbed into a vacuum. "Judge," Higgins repeated, a nervous chuckle escaping his throat. "Sir, she's a suspect. She was a—" "Shut up, Higgins," Miller barked. He moved around the desk, fumbling for his keys. "Unlock her immediately. What on earth is wrong with you?" "I want the handcuffs removed, Sergeant," Serafina stated, "but do not remove them yet. I want the captain here. I want the body camera footage downloaded without delay, and I want my phone call. Judge Wallace, I am profoundly sorry. I did not realize he was bringing—" Miller was visibly sweating. "I know you did not, Sergeant," Serafina replied, her gaze slowly shifting to Officer Higgins. Higgins appeared as if he had just ingested shattered glass. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly hue of gray. He looked at the woman in the bathrobe, the silk, the face he had dismissed. Suddenly, he understood why she possessed such an intimate knowledge of the law. You're a judge," Higgins whispered. "I am a federal circuit judge for the Eastern District," Serafina clarified, her voice resonating like the strike of a gavel. "And you, Officer Higgins, have just unlawfully arrested a federal official. You have violated my civil rights, and you have engaged in profiling a citizen based on bias. I informed you that you were making a grave error." I didn't know," Higgins stammered. "I was merely performing my duties." "No," Serafina countered. "You were abusing your authority, and now I shall exercise mine." The atmosphere within the precinct transformed from the mundane hum of bureaucracy to the suffocating tension of a bomb squad awaiting a countdown. Officer Clint Higgins stood by the booking desk, his hands hovering uselessly near his belt. He watched Sergeant Miller frantically typing on his terminal, deleting the draft of the arrest record, his fingers trembling over the keys. Serafina Wallace stood in the center of the room, still clad in her burgundy robe and slippers, her hands still cuffed behind her back. She had declined Sergeant Miller's third offer to remove them. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 62, underscore, underscore, she had stated, her voice cutting through the room like a surgical scalpel. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 63, underscore, underscore, Captain Michael O'Malley burst through the double doors of the administrative wing 3 minutes later. A man nearing retirement, his waistline strained his uniform buttons, and his face, typically flushed, was now a stark white. He had known Serafina Wallace for 15 years, had testified in her courtroom, and had shared coffee with her at charity galas. He saw the woman standing there, humiliated yet regal, and then he looked at the young officer beside her. Quote, 64, O'Malley whispered. He rushed forward. Quote, 65, quote, 66, Serafina interrupted, her gaze fixed on the police department seal painted on the wall. I want to understand why your officer felt empowered to escort a federal judge from her own driveway like a common criminal. Higgins, O'Malley growled, turning to face the young officer. Give me the keys to the cuffs now. Higgins fumbled for his key ring. Captain, I followed protocol. She refused to identify herself. She was uncooperative. I had reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion of what? O'Malley shouted, snatching the keys from Higgins' hand. Quote, 72, O'Malley moved behind Serafina and unlocked the cuffs. The metal clicked open, and Serafina brought her arms forward. Rubbing her wrists, deep red indentations marked where Higgins had applied excessive pressure. She looked at her wrists and then held them up for O'Malley to see. Quote, 73, quote, 74, O'Malley pleaded, his voice lowering. Quote, 75, Serafina emitted a cold, sharp laugh. Quote, 76, the precinct fell deathly silent. The other officers, who had been feigning work, were now openly observing. Quote, 77, Serafina announced. Quote, 78, Higgins finally spoke. His bruised ego unable to contain itself. Quote, 79, Serafina turned to him slowly, walking until she was inches from his face. She exuded the scent of expensive tea and raw power. Quote, 80, the doors opened again. This time, it was not a police officer, but a tall man in a bespoke charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase. He possessed a jawline that could cleave glass and eyes that scanned the room with predatory intelligence. It was Atticus Wallace, Serafina's husband, and the most formidable civil rights attorney in the state. He stopped, observed his wife in a bathrobe, noted the red marks on her wrists, and saw the terrified expression on Captain O'Malley's face. Atticus did not yell or scream. He calmly walked to the counter, produced a business card, and slid it towards Sergeant Miller. Quote, 81, Atticus stated smoothly. Quote, 82, He turned to Serafina, his eyes softening. Quote, 83, quote, 84, she replied. Quote, 85, quote, 86, he said, turning back to Higgins. He scrutinized the young officer as if inspecting a piece of spoiled fruit. Quote, 87, By the time Serafina and Atticus departed the station, the sun was fully risen. However, for Officer Clint Higgins, the day was growing progressively darker. He was immediately stripped of his badge and firearm and placed on administrative leave pending investigation, as per the official press release. Yet, Higgins was not overly concerned. He had the Fraternal Order of Police and his union representative, a formidable figure named Frank quote, 88, Rizzo, who had successfully defended officers in far more serious cases than arresting a woman in a bathrobe. 2 days later, Higgins sat in a dimly lit conference room at the Union Hall. Rizzo sat opposite him, chewing on an unlit cigar. Quote, 89, Rizzo said, leaning forward, quote, 90, quote, 91, Higgins insisted. underscore underscore quote underscore 92 underscore 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 quote underscore 93 underscore Rizzo interjected, holding up his hand. Underscore underscore quote underscore 94 underscore 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 quote underscore 95 underscore 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 quote underscore 96 underscore Rizzo corrected. Underscore underscore quote underscore 97 underscore underscore. It was a disreputable tactic, but it was their only option. Higgins nodded, a flicker of hope igniting within him. He rationalized that he was the actual victim, a working-class individual performing his job, while she was the ivory tower elite looking down on him. Meanwhile, in the library of the Wallace estate, the atmosphere was markedly different. Serafina sat at a grand mahogany desk, surrounded by files. She was not solely relying on her husband's efforts. As a judge, she knew how to construct an airtight case. "Atticus, look at this," she said, sliding a tablet across the desk. Atticus picked it up. It was a personnel file. "How did you obtain this?" "I have associates in the district attorney's office who are exceedingly weary of Officer Higgins's cases being dismissed," Serafina explained. "Examine page 4. Atticus read the document, his eyebrows shooting upwards in surprise. 3 excessive force complaints within a 2-year period, all lodged against women of minority backgrounds, were each dismissed by internal affairs as unsubstantiated, Serafina observed. However, she urged them to consider the prevailing pattern. In every instance, he asserted that the individual in question was attempting to retrieve a weapon or resisting apprehension. Yet, surveillance footage from 2 of those encounters clearly showed the women standing their ground. "He's a predator wearing a badge," Atticus commented softly. "His targets are women he believes are incapable of defending themselves." "Precisely," Serafina affirmed. "He perceived me as a domestic worker or a caregiver. He noticed the robe. He saw my skin tone. And he concluded I possessed no authority. That's his modus operandi. He counts on victims being too impoverished or too intimidated to pursue legal action. Therefore, we won't merely sue him," Atticus stated, grasping her intent. "We will address the pattern. We will hold the chief accountable for retaining him on the force." "We're going for total annihilation," Serafina concurred. "But we need public awareness. If we only succeed in court, he'll be discharged and relocate to the adjacent county. My objective is to ensure his professional decertification. I want to guarantee he never again occupies a position of command. The body camera recordings, Atticus mentioned, are being withheld by the police department from public disclosure, citing an ongoing inquiry. They are deliberately delaying," Serafina declared. "They comprehend that once that footage circulates online, the city will erupt. Their aim is an amicable resolution. Are you amenable to settlement?" Serafina rose from her seat. She walked to the window, gazing out at the driveway where the entire incident had unfolded. "This morning, they extended an offer of $2 million, she stated quietly, in exchange for dropping the lawsuit and signing a non-disclosure agreement. "That represents a considerable sum," Atticus remarked, though it was evident that they had no financial need for it. "It's blood money," Serafina retorted. "It's a payment to silence me so that Higgins can perpetrate this same act against someone else next week. I declined their offer." "So, what is the strategy?" Serafina turned back, a subtle, menacing smile gracing her lips. "The strategy is transparency. If the police department refuses to release the footage, so be it. However, under the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act, the dispatch logs are public documents, and in Virginia, 911 calls are also publicly accessible." She tapped a file on her desk. "I retrieved the 911 call that led him to my neighborhood, the report of a suspicious individual, and the caller did not specify a black female. Serafina revealed that the caller had described a white male teenager in a hoodie, peering into vehicles. Higgins fabricated the description to justify detaining me. He conjured the probable cause out of thin air," Atticus whistled softly. "That constitutes more than a procedural infraction. That's perjury on an official police report. That's a felony." "We have him cornered," Serafina declared, "but we must execute the plan flawlessly. We have a deposition scheduled with Higgins tomorrow. He remains unaware that we possess the 911 recordings. He will appear there and commit perjury under oath. And when he does," Atticus grinned, "we will apprehend him." The groundwork was laid. This was no longer merely a legal dispute, it was the professional demise of an officer. Meanwhile, Higgins, ensconced in his apartment and consuming inexpensive beer, believed himself secure. He was convinced the institutional solidarity of the police would shield him. He had no inkling that this protective bulwark was about to be obliterated by a force-wielding judicial authority. The deposition chamber at the esteemed law firm of Wallace, Sterling, and Thorne was maintained at a temperature akin to a refrigerated storage unit. This was a deliberate choice. The climate control was set to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, a calculated psychological maneuver intended to discomfit the opposing party. Officer Clint Higgins occupied one side of the expansive glass-topped table, nervously adjusting the collar of his dress shirt, which felt uncomfortably constricting. Beside him sat Frank Rizzo, the union representative, and a city attorney named Brenda Poulos, whose demeanor suggested a preference for undergoing a root canal over defending this particular case. Across from them was Atticus Wallace, utterly composed. He had not consulted his notes for a considerable 10 minutes, his attention solely fixed on Higgins. Serafina was seated at the far end of the table. She had foregone her judicial robes for the occasion, opting instead for a sharply tailored, cream-colored power suit that far exceeded Higgins's annual income. She remained silent, her presence alone exerting a palpable, overwhelming pressure within the room. The court reporter diligently transcribed the proceedings as Atticus cleared his throat. Quote, 104, Atticus commenced, his tone deceptively mild. Quote, 105, I am fully aware of the law, Higgins retorted sharply, his confidence bolstered by Rizzo's prior encouragement. Just adhere to the agreed-upon narrative, Rizzo had advised. Reasonable suspicion, good faith error. You were unaware she was a judge. Very well, Atticus conceded. Let us return to the morning of October 14th. In your official police report, and I am quoting directly, you stated that you stopped Judge Wallace because she fit the description of a suspect reported in a 911 call concerning vehicle break-ins. Is that accurate? Yes, Higgins affirmed with conviction. And what precisely was that description? Atticus inquired. Higgins did not hesitate. This particular detail had been memorized. The dispatch relay indicated a black female, of medium build, wearing dark attire. She was clad in a burgundy robe. From a distance, it appeared dark. She was positioned near the roadway. It was a definitive match. Therefore, you are testifying under oath that you received a description of a black female from dispatch? Yes. And you relied on that specific description to detain my client? Yes. It constituted probable cause. Atticus nodded slowly. He reached into his briefcase. The faint sound of the leather zipper was the sole audible noise in the chamber. He withdrew a compact flash drive and connected it to the laptop that was linked to the room's projection screen. Quote, 108, Atticus announced, his voice deepening by an octave, becoming more resolute and incisive. Quote, 109, Rizzo. The union representative ceased his rhythmic chewing on his pen. He sat bolt upright. Objection. We have not been presented with this exhibit. It is impeachment evidence, Atticus countered swiftly. I am not obligated to disclose it until your client is caught in a falsehood, and I believe we are approximately 3 seconds away from that precise moment. Atticus pressed the spacebar. The audio recording filled the room. It was a documented telephone conversation. Dispatcher, 911, what is your emergency? Caller, yes. Hello, I am on Willow Creek Drive. I just observed a young person attempting to open my truck door. Dispatcher. Can you describe the suspect? Caller, yes, it's a white kid, possibly 16 years old, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He is on a skateboard. He just headed towards the park. Dispatcher, white male, gray hoodie, skateboard. Understood. We will dispatch a unit. The recording concluded. The ensuing silence was profound, oppressive, and absolute. Higgins stared at the laptop speakers, his mouth slightly ajar. His complexion shifted from pale to a deep, almost bilious crimson. Atticus leaned forward, akin to a shark sensing blood in the water. Officer Higgins, Atticus declared, his voice resonating with triumph. The suspect was a white teenage boy on a skateboard. My client is a 52-year-old black woman wearing a silk robe. Can you elucidate for me, and for the recording device capturing this deposition, how those two descriptions align? Higgins stammered. He glanced at Rizzo for assistance. Rizzo abruptly slammed his folder shut. We require a recess. No, Serafina interjected, speaking for the first time. Her voice, while calm, possessed the formidable power of a hurricane. We will not be taking a recess. You will answer the question, officer. You deliberately falsified your police report to fabricate probable cause. You engaged in profiling me, and now you have just committed perjury on video. Perhaps I misheard the radio transmission, Higgins attempted, perspiration beading on his temple. The radio can be staticky at times. It was an unintentional error. We have also obtained the radio transmission logs, Atticus stated, intensifying the pressure. The dispatcher clearly articulated, suspect is white male juvenile. You acknowledged the call with a 1 Alpha 20 copy white male. You heard it. You acknowledged it. And then you observed a black woman in a respectable neighborhood and decided she did not belong. Atticus stood, his height now towering over the young officer. This deposition is concluded, Atticus proclaimed. We are not pursuing a settlement. We are proceeding to trial, and I will be submitting this transcript to the district attorney immediately. You will not merely forfeit your badge, Higgins. You will face imprisonment. Brenda Pulos, the city attorney, regarded Higgins with palpable disdain. She began to gather her belongings. The city is rescinding its indemnification for your defense, Officer Higgins. You acted outside the scope of your employment by intentionally committing perjury. You are now entirely on your own. Higgins surveyed the room, a sense of impending doom settling upon him. The safety net provided by the union, the city, and the department had just evaporated. The downfall of Officer Clint Higgins was not a gradual decline. It was a precipitous plunge. 2 days following the disastrous deposition, Atticus Wallace disseminated the body camera footage to the press. He didn't limit his distribution to local news outlets. He sent it to national networks. The video, headlined quote, 116 garnered over 10 million views within a 4-hour span. The visual evidence was irrefutable. The overbearing arrogance of Higgins. The composed, dignified defiance of Judge Serafina Wallace. The precise moment he fastened the handcuffs onto her wrists, despite her warning him that he was making a grave error, encapsulated a perfect storm of incompetence and malice. The internet, as it invariably does, commenced its virtual onslaught. Hashtags such as #FireHiggins and #JudgeWallace surged to the #1 global trending positions. Digital investigators unearthed Higgins's archived social media posts, uncovering years of questionable humor and biased remarks that collectively painted a portrait of an individual who should never have been entrusted with a firearm. On Friday morning, the chief of police in Stone Creek convened a press conference. He appeared weary, fully aware that his own position was also at risk if he did not act decisively. Effective immediately, the chief announced, as flashes erupted before his face, Officer Clint Higgins has been terminated from the force due to conduct unbecoming an officer and a violation of departmental policy concerning probable cause. Furthermore, we are cooperating fully with the state attorney's criminal investigation. However, the termination was merely an appetizer. The main course of retribution was served with chilling efficiency in a courtroom. Ironically, within the same courthouse where Serafina presided, albeit in a different division, the district attorney, compelled by public outcry and the incontrovertible evidence, charged Clint Higgins with 2 counts: felony perjury and deprivation of rights under the color of law, stemming from his false testimony during the deposition. The trial was expedited. Higgins lacked the financial resources for a high-profile defense attorney, as the city had disavowed him. He was compelled to engage a public defender, a young, overburdened lawyer who radiated exhaustion. Serafina occupied a seat in the front row each day. She offered no public statements to the press, merely observing. When the verdict was delivered, guilty on all counts, Higgins wept. It was not a dignified display of emotion, but the guttural sobs of a bully who had finally encountered someone he could not dominate. Yet, the repercussions of his actions did not cease with the conviction. The civil lawsuit initiated by Serafina proceeded. Given the city's withdrawal of support, Higgins bore personal liability. The judgment awarded was for $1.5 million in punitive damages. Higgins did not possess $1.5 million. His former colleagues, sheriff's deputies, arrived at his residence a month later. They were not present for a social call. They were there to serve him with an eviction notice. "Clint, you need to leave," the deputy stated, his gaze fixed on the ground. The bank seized the house to satisfy the judgment lien. Higgins stood on his lawn, mirroring Serafina's posture that day. But he was not attired in a silk robe. He wore sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. His fiancée, a woman named Stacy, who had initially remained supportive, had packed her belongings the day the felony conviction was rendered. She had no desire to be married to a convicted felon. She had left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter. "Where am I supposed to go?" Higgins inquired, his voice cracking. "Not my concern, Clint," the deputy responded. "You know the protocol. You have 10 minutes to gather your essential belongings." Higgins walked to his vehicle, a leased truck that was also on the verge of repossession. He tossed a duffel bag into the rear. As he backed out of his driveway, he noticed a news van parked across the street. The reporter was not there to interview him. They were documenting the downfall of the corrupt officer, and then came the final, crushing blow. Over the subsequent months, as Higgins attempted to secure employment, he discovered that his name was toxic. Security firms refused to hire him. Construction crews wished to avoid any potential complications. He applied for a position as a night manager at a warehouse. The hiring manager, an older black man, reviewed his resume. He then looked up at Clint. "Aren't you the individual who apprehended that judge?" the manager inquired. Clint lowered his gaze, a burning shame ascending his neck. "That was a misunderstanding." The manager slid the resume back across the desk. "We value integrity in this establishment, Mr. Higgins. I do not believe you are a suitable candidate." Clint walked out into the rain. He was without a badge, without a home, without a fiancé, and he carried a felony record that would forever be a mark against him. He checked his phone. A notification appeared from a news application. Judge Serafina Wallace, nominated for the Supreme Court shortlist. He stared at the screen. The woman he had attempted to humiliate was ascending to the pinnacle of national power, and he was standing in a parking lot, contemplating whether he possessed sufficient gasoline to reach his mother's residence, the only sanctuary that would still accept him. He realized then that Serafina had been correct that morning in the driveway. She had not merely shattered his career, she had meticulously dismantled his entire existence, piece by piece, utilizing the very legal framework he had attempted to weaponize against her. 3 years constitutes a significant duration in the political arena, but it represents an eternity in the life of a man who has lost everything. Washington, D.C. in late October was characterized by biting winds and stiff collars. Within the Dirksen Senate office building, the recycled air hung heavy with the mingled sense of history and apprehension. The chamber was thronged with attendees. Photographers lined the rear wall, their camera shutters clicking with the incessant rhythm of a swarm of mechanical cicadas. Judge Serafina Wallace sat at the witness table, an isolated figure amidst a vast expanse of dark wood. She poured a glass of water from a silver pitcher, her hand remarkably steady. She was no longer merely a circuit judge from Virginia. She was the president's appointee for the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, the second most influential court in the nation and a crucial stepping stone to the Supreme Court. Senator Richard Sterling, the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, leaned towards his microphone. His face, resembling a crumpled road map, and his reputation for verbally dismantling nominees for sport were well established. He shuffled through his papers, ostensibly seeking a vulnerability. "Judge Wallace," Sterling's voice boomed, amplified throughout the chamber. "Your professional record is extensive. However, I wish to revisit an incident from 3 years ago, the event known as the Stone Creek incident by the press. You initiated a lawsuit against a local police department for $12 million. You orchestrated the resignation of a police chief. You effectively dismantled an entire precinct, stemming from a single adversarial encounter in your driveway." Sterling paused, adjusting his spectacles to ensure the cameras captured his gravitas. "Some of my esteemed colleagues harbor concerns that this demonstrates a retaliatory inclination," Sterling continued. "They fear you harbor a prejudice against law enforcement. Should you be confirmed, can we rely on your impartiality in cases involving police officers, or will you perpetually perceive the specter of the man who apprehended you?" The room fell into a profound silence. This was the carefully laid trap. If she displayed anger, she would be deemed emotional. If she offered an apology, she would be perceived as weak. Serafina adjusted the microphone. She wore the identical pearl necklace she had donned the day she passed the bar examination 30 years prior. "Senator Sterling," she began, her voice imbued with a resonant, understated power that compelled listeners to lean in. "Vindictiveness is a personal emotion. Justice, however, is a structural principle. You inquire if I dismantled a precinct. I would contend that I preserved a community." She opened the folder before her gaze fixed intently on Sterling, not descending to the documents within. "The officer who apprehended me, Mr. Higgins, did not simply commit an error. He operated within a prevailing culture that incentivized constitutional transgressions. When I filed my lawsuit, my motivation was not financial gain. I donated every cent of the settlement to the Legal Aid Society. My objective was to mandate a consent decree that required body cameras, implicit bias training, and independent oversight. Since the implementation of these reforms, citizen complaints in Stone Creek have decreased by 60%. Crime rates have declined, and public trust has increased. I did not harbor resentment, Senator. I upheld a standard." Sterling frowned, clearly unprepared for this statistically substantiated rebuttal, but the officer, Mr. Higgins, he was incarcerated. He lost his home. Was that level of retribution truly necessary? "Mr. Higgins committed perjury during a federal deposition," Serafina stated, her tone hardening just enough to convey a sharp edge. "He deliberately lied under oath to conceal a civil rights violation. As a judge, and as a nominee for this esteemed court, I regard truth as the fundamental cornerstone of our republic. If an officer of the law cannot be relied upon to speak truthfully, he ceases to be an officer. He becomes a criminal armed with a badge. His fate was not determined by me, Senator. It was the consequence of his own actions." The gallery erupted in murmurs of agreement. Sterling retreated in his seat, visibly defeated. He understood he had no further avenue to challenge her. She was no longer merely a victim. She was an embodiment of unyielding resolve. While Serafina commanded the attention of the Senate floor, the very individual who was the subject of their discussion was engaged in a vastly different struggle 300 meters away. Clint Higgins stood in the break room of Rusty's 24-hour stop, a truck stop and gas station, situated along a desolate stretch of I-95 near Richmond. The fluorescent lighting emitted a headache-inducing hum. The room was permeated with the odors of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. Clint, though 30 years of age, appeared to be in his mid-40s. His hair had thinned considerably, and his complexion exhibited a pale, sallow hue characteristic of prolonged exposure to inadequate sunlight. He wore a jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too large, with the name __117_ stitched in red thread above the breast pocket. He was no longer Officer Higgins. He was inmate number 8,940, recently released on parole and struggling to subsist on minimum wage. "Higgins!" the manager bellowed from the front counter. "The toilet in the men's room is backed up again. Go get the mop." Clint flinched. The ingrained impulse to retort and demand respect surged within his chest. It was a phantom limb from his former life. However, he suppressed the urge. He recalled the parole board hearing. He remembered the rejection letters from 50 different security firms. No firearms permitted. No positions of trust. "On it, boss," Clint mumbled. He retrieved the mop bucket. The water within was a murky, lukewarm gray. As he maneuvered the bucket across the linoleum floor, he caught his reflection in the glass of the beverage cooler. He detested the man staring back at him. He loathed the slump of his shoulders. He abhorred the fear evident in his eyes. He thought about that morning in the driveway every single day. He replayed the recording in his mind. Why hadn't I simply driven away? Why did I have to be in the right? He had once been the undisputed authority figure of his cul-de-sac. He possessed a firearm, a badge, a fiancée, and a pension plan. Now, he had a mop and a studio apartment that carried the persistent odor of mold. The bell above the front door chimed. A sleek black luxury sedan had pulled up to the premium fuel pumps. It was raining heavily outside, a cold, miserable downpour characteristic of Virginia. "Clint, go pump the gas for pump 4, the manager shouted. "Full service. It's pouring out there." "Don't let the customer get wet." Clint zipped up his jacket and pushed through the doors. The wind whipped the rain into his face. He walked towards the black sedan, keeping his head bowed. He did not want to be recognized. Even in this remote location, some individuals might still recall his face from the viral video. The racist cop. The liar. He tapped on the window. "Fill it up, sir." The window rolled down slowly. The interior of the car was warm, exuding the aroma of leather and expensive cologne. The man seated at the driver's wheel turned to look at him. Clint froze. The fuel dispenser slipped from his grasp, striking the car's fender with a clang. It was Atticus Wallace, Serafina's husband, the very man who had taken his deposition, the man who had looked him dead in the eye and declared he was headed for incarceration. Atticus appeared older, more refined, dressed in a tuxedo with his tie loosened, evidently having departed from some gala event in the capital. As Atticus's gaze settled on Clint, a spark of recognition flickered in the lawyer's keen eyes. He glanced at the name embroidered on Clint's uniform, then back to Clint's face. The quiet deepened, punctuated only by the rhythmic drumming of rain on the station's roof. Clint desperately wished he could vanish, to melt into the asphalt. The humiliation was a physical blow, stealing his breath. Here he was, meticulously removing insects from windshields, while the architect of his downfall occupied a vehicle valued at $100,000. Quote, 120, Atticus stated. His tone wasn't accusatory. It lacked any hint of mockery, simply conveying a matter of fact. "Mr. Wallace," Clint managed, his voice wavering. He clutched the fuel nozzle with such force that his knuckles turned bone white. I'm just doing my job." Atticus surveyed the desolate surroundings, the grimy pumps, the erratic neon sign, the man drenched and clad in a work suit. "You served your sentence," Atticus remarked. 14 months, Clint blurted out, the words tumbling forth. "Plus probation. I lost the house. Stacy left. I lost everything." He had no idea why he was confessing this. Perhaps he sought pity or a flicker of remorse from Atticus. Atticus remained impassive. "You lost what you took for granted, Clint. You believed authority was something you wore like a uniform. You failed to grasp that it's something earned through one's character." Clint averted his gaze to his worn boots. "I know, I understand that now." Atticus reached into the center console of his car. For a fleeting moment, Clint recoiled, his instincts anticipating a weapon or a legal summons. Instead, Atticus produced a $20 bill. "For the fuel," Atticus said. "Keep the change." Clint hesitated, declining the money. "I don't want your money." "Take it," Atticus insisted, his voice firm. "Consider it a gratuity. You're earning your keep now. There's honor in honest work." "Clint, there is no honor in oppression. You possess more integrity standing here in the rain than you ever did when you were intimidating women in their driveways." Clint's hand trembled as he accepted the bill. Quote, 133. Clint asked after a pause. Quote, 134, Atticus offered a genuine smile, filled with paternal pride. Quote, 135, the car window silently ascended. The sedan smoothly pulled away, its tires sending a spray of water over Clint's boots. He remained rooted to the spot for a considerable time, the damp $20 bill clutched tightly, watching the receding taillights disappear into the gloom. Forgiveness, he knew, was not on offer. Yet, for the first time in 3 years, he acknowledged his reality. The badge was gone. His inflated ego had deflated. All that remained was the solitary figure in the rain, facing an arduous journey back to his own humanity. 2 weeks later, Stone Creek was a spectacle of autumnal splendor, maples aflame in crimson and oaks boasting a deep, burnished gold. The neighborhood exuded a tranquil air. The for sale sign that had long adorned Higgins' property had vanished. A young family had taken up residence, blissfully unaware of the house's history, of the man who once paced its living room, convinced of his dominion over the street. Serafina Wallace stood on her porch. It was a quiet Sunday morning. She wore her familiar burgundy robe, a garment that had become a personal emblem, a reminder of the day her life transformed from interpreting the law to embodying its highest ideals. She cradled a steaming mug of Earl Grey tea, its warmth seeping into her hands against the crisp air. Her phone chimed on the patio table, a text message from the Senate Majority Leader. "Vote counts are finalized. 928 confirmed. Congratulations, Justice Wallace. She exhaled a breath she felt she had held for 3 long years. Her gaze drifted to the driveway, where long shadows stretched across the paving stones where she had once stood in handcuffs. A police cruiser rounded the corner. Serafina tensed instinctively. The trauma never entirely receded. No matter how many gavels one wielded, the body retained memories the mind struggled to rationalize. The cruiser meandered slowly down the street. It was a new model, emblazoned with the community-endorsed slogan, "Protect and Serve," rendered in large, welcoming lettering. The vehicle halted before her residence, the window lowering. The officer behind the wheel appeared young, perhaps 25, and Caucasian. He looked up at the porch. Serafina waited, her attention fixed on his hands. They rested on the steering wheel, visible and relaxed. "Good morning, Justice Wallace," the officer called out, a genuine smile gracing his features, devoid of any trace of condescension. "Good morning, officer," Serafina replied, her voice steady. "Just conducting a routine patrol," the officer explained. "We saw the news update. Congratulations on the confirmation. The entire precinct is proud that you hail from Stone Creek." Serafina blinked. The irony was palpable, yet surprisingly sweet. The very department that had once apprehended her for simply existing now celebrated her as a hometown hero. "Thank you, officer," she said. "Stay safe out there." "You too, Mom." The officer waved and proceeded down the street, adhering to the speed limit and signaling his intentions. He was a testament to the training she had championed. He was a more effective officer because she had refused to be a victim. Serafina turned back towards her front door. She paused to admire the polished brass nameplate Atticus had installed the previous day. It no longer simply read "The Wallace Residence." It proclaimed, "The Honorable Serafina Wallace." She opened the door and stepped inside. The house was warm, the aroma of breakfast wafting from the kitchen. She closed the door, shutting out the outside world, the lingering specter of Clint Higgins and the weight of the past. She had walked through fire, not merely to survive, but to be reforged into something unbreakable. This is the remarkable, true-to-life account of how a single moment of arrogance shattered one life while elevating another to the annals of history. Officer Higgins presumed his badge entitled him to unquestioning obedience. He failed to recognize he was demanding it from a woman who had authored the very rulebook on rights. He forfeited his career, his liberty, and his dignity, ultimately reduced to menial labor, while the woman he unjustly profiled ascended to the nation's highest court. It serves as a harsh yet necessary lesson in karma. True power resides not in coercion, but in integrity. And when you attempt to break someone forged of stronger material than yourself, you invariably break yourself. Now, I'm eager to hear your perspectives. Do you believe Higgins's punishment was commensurate with his offense? Should he have been granted another opportunity, or did he receive precisely what he deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I endeavor to read and respond to as many as possible. If this narrative of justice served with icy precision resonated with you, please enthusiastically hit the like button. It significantly aids the algorithm in disseminating these stories to a broader audience. And if you haven't already, subscribe and activate the notification bell to ensure you never miss a new upload. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, and always remember to know your rights. I'll see you in the next installment.